Good afternoon. This is a Devar Torah on Parshas Mattos. Mattos is normally read as part of a double Parsha of Matos Maseh. This year, because of a difference in the Parsha readings between Israel and Chutz La'aretz, in other words, outside Israel, we're reading Mattos this week, and we'll be reading Maseh next week. And Chutz La'aretz will be read as a double portion Matos Maseh. Now, Matos Maseh contains three major themes. One is the Moshe is telling the 12 heads of the 12 tribes about Shavuot, about netters and Shavuot. A netter is an undertaking using Hashem's name not to do an action. And a Shavuot is a pledge with Hashem's name to do some type of action. Now, the next thing is, the next part of the Parsha is Moshe is told by God, you got to take revenge on the Midianites, the ones who caused the plague that killed 24,000 people in last week's Parsha, Parshas Pinchas. And for those outside of Israel, which will be this week's Parsha, the 12,000 people are selected. Now, why 12,000? The Midianite army was far more numerous than 12,000 people. But what happened was no man that had been either directly with the Midianite women or who had not intervened to stop what was going on could not be involved. Only men who had not been tempted by the Midianite women. And so only 1,000 men from each tribe, an army of a total of 12,000, were they able to do that because they were only ones left that were totally pure, totally unaffected by the Midianite women. And Pinchas, of course, was the one who stopped the plague by killing Zimri and Cosby. Now, the Parsha then goes on to discuss the battle. The prophet Balaam, who had triggered the whole thing by giving the Midianites the idea in the first place, is killed along with most of the Midianite people. The Parsha then goes on to discuss the division of the war booty, both animals and the slaves that were left, and the valuable objects of gold and silver, and how everything had to be purified. The Parsha then goes on to the request of Reuven and Gad to take the land on the east bank of the Jordan rather than enter Eretz Israel with the other tribes. And that's where the Parsha is completed. Now, first thing I would like to do is as a theme is, why is the taking of netters and Shavuos so important that there are two whole masechtas of Gemara tractates dealing with these topics? And one of the answers is, besides the fact that one is using Hashem's name, and therefore any misuse of it is a major problem, there's something even deeper going on. As Rav Shimshon Maastropoli, a Rav in the Ukraine in the mid-1600s, explains that normally every time we do a mitzvah, an angel is created who is an advocate for us. Now, in the particular case here, once the mitzvah is very easy to do, once one's taken the action or prayed or done whatever he or she is supposed to do, the angel is formed. In the case of a netter in Shavuot, the angel is only partially formed and will only become complete when a person either carries out the netter and abstains from something, or pledges something in the Shavuot, it takes the actual action. Now, in the Parsha then goes on to start, I'm going to the beginning of chapter 31, It says, Vidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, and Hashem said to Moshe speaking, Nikum nikmat b'nei Israel me'at Hamedianim achet tasef elamecha, and said, what you have to do, take vengeance for the children of Israel against the Midianites, after which you will be gathered onto your people. Now, when Moshe is commanding it, he says, we're taking vengeance for God. Now, why is that? When God said it, he said, take vengeance for yourself. And Moshe explains to God, it's for the honor of your honor and reputation that we are going into this war, not simple for vengeance for ourselves. Now, the wording is very interesting. Why does it say, what is the connection between you conquering the Midianites, and after you conquer the Midianites, you'll be gathered to your people, which means Moshe will die on the east side of the Jordan. And as is explained by Rab Shimshon Astropoli, who also explains another point of why didn't Moshe lead the battle? Moshe Benu should have led the battle. He was even more righteous than Pinchas. And the explanation here goes like this. When it came to the 10 plagues, the first 3 plagues, Moshe did not take the action of either striking the water or striking the earth. And the explanation that's given is because he was, as a baby, he was protected by both the earth and the water, and therefore it would show disrespect if he was to hit them. This is why it was transferred to Aaron, who had been born earlier, and this miracle did not apply to him. And we also see a similar concept when we talk about covering the challah on a meal, the bread, because to not embarrass the wine, because the wine can cannot be used to bless the bread, but if there is no wine, the kiddush, the blessing over the wine, can be said over the bread. And we don't want to embarrass them. Now, this is talking about inanimate objects. And one explanation that's given with both that and with Moshe, not striking the water or the earth, which are again inanimate objects, is that we're not only respecting them and showing how much more so we respect people, but we're also, one of the explanations is respecting the methods by which Hashem does miracles. And therefore, we're actually honoring Hashem by not doing that. And as Rav Shimshon Mastropoli explains, that's even more so why he could not attack the Midianites, because when Moshe was fleeing from the Egyptians, he wound up in Midian. He received the home with Yithro, married one of Yithro's daughters, and lived there for many, many years. And it was from there he eventually came to the mountain where Hashem was going to send him on his mission to liberate the Jewish people from Egypt. Now, on another level, it explains that when it says that he will be gathered to his people after he conquers the Midianites, what is the connection with that? Is that the dealing with the Midianites and their allies, the Amalekites, did not end with Moshe. In fact, it's explained that it's saying that in effect, it's an allusion to something was going to go on. As explains in the Gemara, that Yiftach is like Shmuel, Gideon is like Moshe, and Shimshon is like Aaron. Now, what does this have to do with this pasuk? It's explaining on a few levels. First of all, that the neshama of Gideon, who was going to be very important in battling with the Midianites later, the spark of holiness from which his soul came was from Moshe Rabbeinu, and he had a similar role to Moshe Rabbeinu, because what was one of Moshe's big roles was to mediate between the Jewish people and God, especially when they often got into Averas. And in one case, they had undertaken to keep the Torah, and they broke that agreement when they worshipped the golden calf. And Gideon, besides battling with the Amalekites and the Midianites, also had to act on a few occasions as a mediator between God and the Jewish people. The next one, so what is the connection with Aaron and Shimshon? Shimshon was one of the judges, Shoftim, who single-handedly battled the Plishtim. He had incredible strength. That was the gift he was given. And it explains that Shimshon was a Nazir. Because he was a Nazir, he had a special status. He was not allowed to imbibe wine beverages. When he did, it ultimately led to his downfall. And he wasn't allowed to cut his hair either, as a Nazir. And Aaron and Shimshon had the similarity. What was the similarity? The similarity was that just like Aaron is not allowed to touch the dead as a Kohen, so too was Shimshon was not allowed to. And the question is, what's the connection between Shmuel and Yiftach? Is this, that first of all, why is that mentioned before Moshe and Aaron? Shmuel came later. It's explaining that even though Shmuel was born later, the spark of holiness that was going to be his soul predated both Moshe and Aaron. And in addition to that, there was another issue. And therefore, that Shmuel was, again, intrinsic in conquering the Amalekites, who were still creating problems, the allies, the Midianites, and his later descendant, from which his spark, holy spark, created, was also involved in a battle with various enemies of Israel. Now, the next thing I would like to discuss is the whole incident with the 2.5 tribes that wanted to be on the East Bank. Now, the way of asking for it was a little peculiar. They desired the land. They said, we have plenty of cattle, we have plenty of livestock, and there's plenty of land here. Therefore, we want to go on the East Bank. And Moshe said, if you divide the people, we saw what happened with the Meraglim, the spies. If you could set back the Jewish people another 40 years, if you're going to do that, if you're not going to cooperate. So the agreement was that Reuven and God would go across the Jordan, battle with the other nations, and only with battling with the other nations, Canaanite nations, which took 20 years, only after that would they be allowed to have land on the East Bank. And even though they did that pledge, it was going to take action later on by Pinchas to remind them of that pledge and have them go, enter there. And it had negative consequences for all of them. Now, the land was so big that they were seeking that basically it was going to take another half tribe. They simply couldn't maintain the land by themselves. And the other half tribe was half tribe of Manasseh. Now, the question is, what's the connection between these 2.5 tribes? And we find out, again, there are some negative consequences, but before we get to those, they said, okay, we'll go across into Israel proper, and we'll build shelter, we'll build pens for our livestock, and we'll build cities for our wives and children. Moshe had to correct them because they were so materialistic that they put the livestock ahead of their families. Now, they also were going to suffer for that. The first tribes to go into exile later on, even way before the destruction of the first temple, was Reuven, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. And beyond that, question is, why the half tribe of Manasseh? And the explanation of that is, in the incident where Yosef wanted to test how true his brothers were when they came down to Egypt, he put his goblet, his wine cup, into one of the sacks, which was going to be Benjamin's. And when Manasseh was sent to capture them and show that they had committed theft, and they tore their garments in retaliation for them, for Manasseh causing them to rend their garments because of what happened, God said, okay, that's fine. You did that. I'm going to divide your tribe in half. So that's why one of the reasons the tribe of Manasseh, in fact, wound up on the East Bank. Now, they all went on to regret it. And they realized they made their mistake. And they realized the land on the West Bank was far better in Israel proper. And as Mana Mashiach, at the time when the ingathering of the exiles was finalized, at that time, the Jews that make up those 2.5 tribes, according to one opinion, are still in exile, I'm not sure where, will all get a share in Eretz Israel proper, not in the East Bank. Now, why is Reuven, Gad, and a half tribe of Manasseh, what did they do that Hashem made it that they wanted to have that land, that tempted them into this materialism, even though they later regretted it? And as is explained in the Sefer HaLikutim, there was a defect in each one of those tribes. It was an unintentional defect. In the case of the tribe of Reuven, when he was conceived, Yaakov thought he was with Rachel, but he was actually with Leah because Lavan had switched the daughters, and that led to certain imbalances in Reuven's personality and makeup. And what about the case of the tribe of Gad? What about them? Now, he was a daughter of Zilpah, who was the maidservant, the Shivka of Leah. Now, when Yaakov was with Bila, Rachel told him about it, and he agreed to have children by her. With the case of Zilpah, Leah just put him in. He did not know he was with Zilpah. He thought he was with Leah. And again, this also created problems. This created a pogrom and imperfection in God. Now, what about the half tribe of Manasseh? Now, that is a little more complicated because what happened there was, who was Manasseh a product of? He was a product of Yosef, and who was Yosef's wife in Egypt? Asnat. Now, Asnat was a product of Dinah, when she was kidnapped by Shechem, and he forced himself upon her. And the tribe of Manasseh wound up with two aspects. Shechem's whole nature was klipa, spiritual impurities. There was a neshama potential that was being held captive, which was released at that time. So what did the tribe of Manasseh inherit? The half of it was the holiness of their father, Yosef. The other half was from the negative side, represented by Shechem. It came from Aznat. And therefore, there was again an imperfection. And to right that imperfection and to purify him from the impurity, the pagam that was created by this, Hashem, it's decided that they had to serve out a time as a righting this problem by being in the East Bank, not sharing in Eretz Israel, and ultimately being the first to be exiled. Now, as we're going into this, we're in the beginning of the 3-week period between Yud Zayin Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. We should keep in mind that even though these events, some of these events mentioned, had tragic implications, ultimately there was a redemption and there will be another redemption. May you everybody have a good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.